and welcome to another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Joanne LaFlamme.
I'm Chris Costa.
So Chris, what would you like to discuss today?
Well, I'm getting set to set up my materials, and I had some questions on things maybe I can be thinking about before I set up the items, how to categorize them, different things like that.
Okay. Well, let's first kind of talk about the different types of materials, and then we can get into the categories.
Sure.
So let me just come over to Enterprise for a minute, and I'm actually in inventory now, and you'll see underneath the category, there's a field here called Material Type. And I'm just going to click on the drop down for a second just to show the 4 types that we have here. And those are sheet stock, roll stock, ink, and standard items. So let's go over those first so we're clear on what those are, and then we can get into the categories.
Right.
So basically, sheet stock will be any sheet paper in your system that will go through the press, that will be printed on.
Right.
So everything that is individual sheets that can be printed on will be grouped under the sheet stock. Then you also have roll stock. Now that would be any, again, paper that comes in a roll. So anything that you would print on that's on a roll. That wouldn't include things like laminating material or shrink wrapping material. That may also come on a roll, but you're not printing on those items.
Right.
Then you have ink, which is basically ink, and then standard items, which is everything else. Now that would be laminating material, shrink wrapping material, boxing material, binding material, plate making material,
All that
paper
extra
clips,
stuff, yeah.
if you wanted
Everything
to.
else, yep.
Everything else, right.
Okay.
Anything that you don't print on and that's not ink would be under standard items.
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay?
So I guess, are there any things to think about before I start putting these different items in categories?
Well, right. That is the first thing you want to think about, is the categories. How do you want to group them? And there's some things you have to think about when you're going to set up your categories.
Okay.
So let's take a look at the category screen.
Okay.
So let me go into one of my categories, and I'm going to hit Modify. And you'll see the fields that are available here to create a category. The first thing you have to enter is a 5-digit alphanumeric code. You'll give it a description to describe what this particular category is. We also have an RFQ description, and this would be if you were using our .NET RFQ module. You can create descriptions for the RFQ module, and by even just putting a description in that field, that's what makes that category of material available to the RFQ module.
Okay.
If you're not using that module, you can skip that field
Doesn't matter.
completely.
Okay.
Okay. Now here are a couple of fields at the bottom here that really, as you're filling these in, that will help determine what should go into that category. The first being the sales code. You may have decided, and this is an option in your system, to break out the sales in an invoice by the labor, processes, and materials that are in a job. And if you're going to do that, then that sales code that those dollars are going to go to is defined by the category. So you want to make sure you group all your papers so that they're in the same sales GL code. Okay? Next, we have a plant ID if you're using multi-plant environment. And then you have a costing method, a default costing method. And you have a variety of costing methods. Now that one is just a default. So if you can have papers that have different costing methods in there and it won't matter.
Okay.
But if most of them are going to be per M or most of them are going to be per each, you can use that as a default.
Okay.
Default basic area. Now this is based on the grade, and what basically that is the area of a standard sheet of paper for that grade. And the grade is a good way to break up your categories, in addition to how you would, the GL code that you would use. So you might want to break them up by cover stock, text stock, offset paper, that kind of thing. And then within each category, like your say your cover stock, you'll have individual papers for every size, every color that you keep in inventory.
Okay. Makes sense.
And then the last field here is your reduced ink mileage. You can actually, if this whole category reduces the or absorbs more ink, you can reduce the ink mileage. So that's another consideration when you're grouping your papers. If you have paper that absorbs more ink and they all absorb them at a certain percentage, then you'd want to group them that way so that you could put a default percentage on it.
Okay. Now I presume, and I think you mentioned this, but if you have these fields filled in and then you go to add items, it'll bring these in as defaults, but you can just change them.
In some of the cases, yes. You can't do that for the sales code. That's on the category only.
Okay.
But things like the costing method would be a field that you can change individually.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. All right.
All right. One other thing we can mention here is this button at the bottom for updating templates. You'll notice when we click on that, a screen pops up that says, this routine will update every template that has paper in it in this category. That gives you the opportunity, if you've used the material in that category in templates, and you've made changes to it, you've changed pricing in particular, and you want to update the pricing in those templates, you can do that all at once for all the papers in that category with that button.
Okay. So if I have
Okay.
a group, say 50 papers or that I may know need to get updated every quarter, every whatever, I can put them in the same category.
Right.
And help do that.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay, do you have any other questions?
No, I think that was very good.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of EPMS Tech Talk. I'm Joanne LaFlamme.
I'm Chris Costa.
Please look forward for more to come.